Hello, this is Doug Tidwell. As you may remember from our previous video, I was sitting in my corner office admiring the scenery through my floor-to-ceiling windows when I received an email from Jeremy Morrison of Hampshire, England. Jeremy wrote, "Dear Doug, I feel like I'm just sitting here watching the world of containers pass me by. Can you please help me get started? I'm updating my CV and would love to put Docker and Kubernetes on there. Cheers, Jeremy Morrison, Romsey, Hampshire." Jeremy, I hope you enjoyed last week's video. In that video, you installed Docker and various Bluemix command line tools. You built a Docker image from a repo you cloned, then you ran that image as a Docker container on a local machine. This week, we're going to finish our introduction to containers by building a Kubernetes cluster in the IBM cloud, either pushing or building a Docker image in the IBM cloud, running a Docker container in the cluster, then accessing the app running in the cluster, in the container, in the cloud. Won't this be fun? You'll start by creating a new Kubernetes cluster. Go to the IBM Cloud Console, select the menu in the upper left, and choose Containers. When you see this panel, click the Create Cluster button. Now, give your cluster a name. I called mine Mailbag. We're using the free plan by default. The price is right, so click this Create Cluster button. This doesn't create a production-ready cluster, but it does what you need. It will be 10 to 15 minutes before the cluster is up and running. We'll keep ourselves occupied while we wait for the cluster to come online. Click the Kubernetes CLI link to go to the Kubernetes site. Follow the instructions for your platform to install the kube control tool. The next thing you'll do is add a namespace for your Docker images. You'll use the namespace in your image names. You'll see that in a minute. The command is bxcr namespace add. With the namespace created, you'll use the Bluemix command to build a Docker image directly into your private registry. The command is bxcr build-t, then the name of your image. Notice that you have to type the address of the IBM Cloud region you're using, then your namespace, then the name of the image, and a tag for that image. You'll create a v1 image here. After several seconds, the image is built in your registry as bxcr images clearly shows. That's one way to do things, but you can also take the image you created in the previous video and push it into the IBM Cloud. First, you have to use the Docker tag command to, well, tag the image. Notice that you start with the current image name, then create another name as you did earlier. In this case, use v2 as the tag so you can keep the two images separate. The tag command only takes a second. Now, you can use the Docker push command with the new name to push that image into the cloud. I ran these commands from the Mac and Linux command lines, but you can also check the images in your private repository by going to the Containers menu. Expand the Registry tab, then click Private Repositories. You only see one image name here, but that's because you've stored two versions of the same image. Click on the image name and you'll see the two versions. Also note that the IBM Cloud automatically scans our images for vulnerabilities. The code doesn't do anything, so it must be using a vulnerable version of an NPM package. Out of sheer laziness, finding and fixing that is left as an exercise for the reader or viewer. Now that you have your Docker images stored in the IBM Cloud, it's time to move to Kubernetes. By this time, your cluster should be up and running, so type bxcs cluster config mailbag to get the credentials for the Mailbag cluster. The output of the command includes the details you need to configure the kube control command you installed earlier. Copy and paste the output from the cluster config command and you're ready to go. When you set the kube config variable, kube control uses those credentials to control your cluster running in the IBM Cloud. As you would expect, the Windows version uses the Windows syntax for setting an environment variable. And be aware that those settings only work for the current command line. If you switch to another terminal, you'll have to define kubeconfig again. It's showtime! You'll run a series of 4 Kubernetes and Bluemix commands that do all the work. First, type kubecontrol run apptest --image equals and the name of the Docker image you want to run in the cluster. Apptest can be any name you like, by the way. Next, expose the running image as a service by typing kubecontrol expose deployment /apptest --type equals node port --name equals apptest service --port equals 6006. At this point, you've got everything up and running. You just need to figure out the IP address of the cluster and the randomly assigned port number that the cluster uses to expose your app. kubecontrol describe service apptest service gives you the port number within Kubernetes, and bxcs workers mailbag gives you the IP address of the cluster itself. Go to a browser, combine these two values into a URL, and you'll see your running app. Remember, this is running live on the web, so anyone in the world can see your handiwork. You've deployed a Docker container inside a Kubernetes cluster. With your newfound skills, brace yourself for prospective employers hurling large bags of cash your way, or something like that. Jeremy, I hope this two-part series was useful. You've installed tools and infrastructure and configured the IBM Cloud to deliver your apps via state-of-the-art container technology. Thanks again for your email, and we'll see you again soon with another episode of the developerWorks Mailbag. This longer than usual episode has been brought to you commercial-free by developerOS, the official breakfast cereal of the developerWorks Mailbag.